The Bible in Reverse, How Everything Leads Back to God, by David Rousseau. Introduction. Begin at the end. What if the end is not the end? What if everything we've been taught to fear collapse, judgment, the unraveling of the world is not destruction, but revelation? We are used to moving in one direction, forward, from beginning to ending, from creation to conclusion, from certainty to uncertainty. We read life the same way we read stories, starting at the first page, believing everything builds toward a final moment that defines it all. But what if that instinct is incomplete? What if understanding does not come from moving forward but from moving back? This journey asks you to do something unnatural, to let go of progression, to release the need for outcomes, to stop asking, what happens next? And instead ask a different question, what remains, when everything else is removed? Because at the end of all things, beyond the noise, beyond the systems, beyond the identities we build and defend, something is left behind, something that does not collapse, something that does not depend on time, or structure, or belief. We rarely notice it, because we are always adding more knowledge, more meaning, more explanation. We build layer upon layer, until truth becomes buried beneath everything we think we understand. So here, we do the opposite. We begin at the end where everything breaks apart, and then, step by step, we move backward, back through the fall of power and the illusion of control, back through religion, as it loosens its grip on form and returns to something quieter, back through laws, teachings, and expectations until nothing external tells us who we are or how to live, back through history, through humanity itself, to a time before division, before identity. Before the world was split into pieces we struggle to reconcile. With each step, something disappears, not randomly, not chaotically, but precisely. What is temporary falls away. What is constructed dissolves. What is borrowed returns to where it came from, and what remains becomes impossible to ignore. Comma. This is not about rewriting the Bible. It is about revealing a pattern within it, a pattern that mirrors reality itself, a movement away from the source, and a return to it. Because everything we experience, every system, every belief, every story is layered on top of something more fundamental, and no matter how complex those layers become, they all point back in the same direction, not forward, back to simplicity, back to unity, back to what existed before anything needed to be explained. This journey is not meant to convince you of something new. It is meant to uncover something ancient, something you may already recognize, not as an idea, but as a quiet sense beneath everything else. So as you read, don't rush ahead. Let each layer fall. Let each certainty loosen. Let each assumption dissolve without resistance, because this is not a story about what happens next. This is a journey toward what has always been here, and by the time we reach the beginning, you may realize it was never distant at all. Chapter 1. When everything ends. At the end, everything breaks. The world trembles. Systems that seemed eternal crumble into dust. Thrones topple. Empires vanish. Wealth loses meaning. Power evaporates like smoke. The future so carefully imagined, so fiercely guarded, disappears. Revelation is feared because it looks like destruction. The images we carry in our minds are of fire, of chaos, of judgment raining down. But what if destruction is not what it seems? What if, in the unmaking, something essential is revealed? Because when everything ends, nothing false can remain. Titles, authority, status, they fall away. Wealth and influence vanish. Illusions of control dissolve. All that remains is truth, stripped bare, uncompromising, impossible to hide. At first, this clarity can feel frightening. To see the scaffolding of life disappear is to confront a void. It feels like loss, like being unmoored in a storm. And yet, the void is not empty. It is honest. It is luminous in its simplicity. When we start here at the place where everything concludes, we begin in clarity, not chaos. The end is not final. It is revealing. The collapse does not signal defeat. It signals awakening, because what breaks is never the source. What shatters is borrowed, temporary, constructed. And what is real, what has always been real, does not break. It waits, unmoved, quiet, present. In this place, we are stripped of everything that separates us. No power, no law, no promise, no story, nothing to cling to, and in this stripping, we begin to see the end was never the end, it was an unveiling, and so we step backward, not to escape the end, but to follow its lesson, not to deny collapse, but to understand it. Every layer that falls away brings us closer to what was always beneath. Every ruin points to a foundation untouched by time. At the end, everything breaks, and at that break, everything begins to return to what is true, to what is lasting, to what is God. Chapter 2. The Illusion of Power. As we move backward, the world begins to rise again, but we see it differently this time. Empires that once seemed permanent stone walls, gold-laden thrones. Armies that stretched across continents appear fragile, temporary. In forward time, they looked unshakable, but in reverse, their fate is already known. Every kingdom will fall. Every ruler will vanish. Every crown returns to dust. Power, we realize, was never power at all. It was permission. It was borrowed from the fragile belief of others. Temporary, conditional, dependent on fear, on loyalty, on the illusion that control can last forever. And now, watching it unwind, we see the truth. What is built by man cannot last. What rises will fall. What is claimed will be returned. The mighty, once adored and feared, fade into memory. Their voices, once thunderous, now dissolve into silence. Their victories, once celebrated, are undone. And in this reversal, the world teaches us a lesson rarely grasped in forward motion. Power is not a gift to be possessed. It is a mirror, reflecting only the trust and attention we give it. We see the pomp, the ambition, the wars, the statues, the titles, and we recognize them for what they are: temporary scaffolding, structures that hold up human pride for a moment before gravity reclaims them. And yet, even as the empires crumble backward, there is no despair. There is clarity. There is relief. For power, as it dissolves, points us to something greater than itself, something that was never borrowed, never lent, never fragile, something uncheckable. We begin to understand. The end of all earthly power is not loss. It is revelation. It shows us what was always beneath, what never depended on thrones or crowns or armies, what endures beyond time, beyond ambition, beyond the fragile constructs of man. And in moving backward, the lesson becomes clear. To seek power is to chase a shadow. To trust it is to trust in something that will not last. True authority, true strength, is not given. It is not taken. It is found in the source and moved, unborrowed, eternal. So, we continue walking backward, leaving the illusions behind, towards something that was never built, yet has always been. Chapter 3. The Unraveling of Religion. As we move further back, the great structures of belief begin to loosen. Temples, churches, synagogues, mosques, grand symbols of devotion start to fade from prominence. Institutions that once defined faith, that codified it into rules and rituals, begin to dissolve. Layers of doctrine peel away like old paint. The words that demanded obedience, the systems that promised salvation, the hierarchies that claimed authority all begin to disappear, and something unexpected happens. Faith becomes quieter. It is no longer declared from rooftops or bound by tradition. It stops needing walls, leaders, or ceremonies. It becomes simple, internal, immediate, personal. In reverse, religion does not grow stronger. It unravels. It sheds its armor. And in that shedding, it becomes recognizable for what it always was: a connection, a knowing, a remembrance of something larger than oneself. Without the structures, without the outward forms, belief is no longer something you follow. It is something you recognize. It is not learned or imposed. It is remembered, felt in the quiet spaces of being. This is a faith without instruction, without doctrine, without intermediaries. It does not command. It does not demand. It simply exists in the heart that is willing to notice it. The prophets, the priests, the laws of tradition once seen as guides or arbiters fade into the background. What remains is the essence of what inspired them, the internal awareness that the divine is present even when all else is gone. And in this unraveling, a paradox emerges. By stripping faith of its structures, it becomes stronger not in force, but in truth. It becomes inseparable from the source, we begin to see that religion was never about the buildings, the rituals, or the rules. It was about recognition, about presence, about understanding what was always there, quietly, beneath all the noise, beneath all the layers, beneath all the human constructions. And so, as we move backward, we do not lose faith. We simply return to its origin, to something unspoken, unstructured, eternal, something that was never contained, yet has always been accessible. Faith, in reverse, is not acquired. It is remembered. It is not taught. It is recognized. And in that recognition, we find what no institution can give: freedom, clarity, and truth. Chapter 4. When instructions disappear. As we move backward, the letters, the teachings, the rules, the guidance that shaped behavior, belief, and identity begin to fade. Commandments, codes, rituals, doctrines all dissolve into silence. At first, it feels unsettling. Without instruction, without authority telling us what is right or wrong, what is safe or dangerous, we confront a question that has no easy answer. If no one tells us what to do we still know? And the answer emerges slowly, gently. Yes, because before instruction, there was understanding. Before rules were written, etched, or spoken aloud, the essence of right and wrong was already known, not learned, not imposed, felt, in the heart, in the body, in the quiet awareness of being. Morality, in this reversal, is no longer taught. It is remembered, not a law carved into stone, not a command delivered from a pulpit, not a scroll of expectations enforced by fear or reward, but a natural recognition of what harmonizes with life, what aligns with truth, what belongs to the source. Without instruction, the world does not collapse. Life does not spiral into chaos. Instead, clarity emerges. Decisions become simpler. Compassion, honesty, integrity, these are no longer rules to follow. They are instincts to return to. We begin to see the paradox. All the teachings that once seemed essential were scaffolding. They guided? Yes, but only because humanity had moved away from what was always known. When we peel those layers away, the guidance is no longer necessary, because understanding has never left us. We feel it in small moments, a hesitation before harm, a warmth toward another, a silent alignment with what is just and true. These are not learned, they are remembered. As we walk backward through time, the external disappears. What was once written, spoken, and commanded returns to the quiet of the self. Awareness replaces instruction. Presence replaces doctrine. Understanding replaces obligation. And in that space, we recognize something profound. Before rules, before teachings, before authority, there was life, and life knew itself. The letters vanish. The guidance fades. The laws dissolve. And what remains is not emptiness. It is knowing. It is understanding. It is the source, speaking in the silence before instruction. Chapter 5. The life that rewinds. Now we meet the center of the story, but not as we expect. The life of Jesus begins to reverse. The risen returns to the cross. The cross becomes a life. The life becomes quiet. Miracles unravel themselves, one by one. Water becomes water again. Bread multiplies back into a loaf. The blind regain sight, but not in triumph, in stillness. The crowds disappear, their cheers dissolving into nothing. Words retreat into silence. Gestures fold back into stillness. There is no audience now, no applause, no judgment, no expectation, only presence, only being, only the simplicity of what was always real. And in that presence, the truth emerges. The message was never separate from the source. It was never a set of teachings, never a movement, never a story to be followed or recorded. It was the source itself speaking through form, through life, through embodiment. Every act, every word, every moment of recognition and doing, in reverse reveals the underlying unity that had always been there. Nothing was added, nothing was lost. It was all already whole. The temptation to interpret, to measure impact, to chase meaning, fades. There is no moral to extract, no history to recount, only the life itself, flowing backward into its origin. And as we follow this reverse path, something profound is revealed. Jesus was never separate from God. The life, the miracles, the words, they were not a bridge to God. They were the expression of God. They were God, already present, manifest in human form. The extraordinary dissolves into the ordinary. The miraculous becomes the natural state of being. Presence itself is revelation. Understanding is not gained by observation, it is remembered by recognition. As the life unwinds, we see that the center was never an event, never a turning point. It was a still point, a source, a presence from which everything flowed and to which everything returns. And in that stillness, we begin to understand. The story was never about reaching God. It was always about remembering God through life, through form, through being. The life rewinds, the world quiets, and in that quiet, the source speaks not in words, but in one that simply is. Chapter 6. Before the warnings. As we move backward, the prophets grow silent. Their voices, once urgent and insistent, calling humanity back to truth, to justice, to God, begin to fade. The warnings that shook kings and commoners alike dissolve into quiet. No longer do they proclaim judgment. No longer do they urge repentance. Their messages return to the source from which they came and spoken, unneeded, because there is no distance yet, no wandering, no forgetting, no separation that requires correction. You do not need to be called back when you have never left. The urgency that defined the prophet's words loses its purpose. Time itself, with its past and future, has not yet imposed separation. Sin, rebellion, failure, concepts that rely on memory and choice do not yet exist. Everything is present, everything is immediate, everything is whole, and in this silence, a truth is revealed. Prophecy was never about foretelling. It was never about instruction or control. It was about remembrance, about pointing toward what is already true, already present, already whole. As their voices fade, we begin to sense the fullness beneath them. The source has never required intermediaries. The call was never external. It was always internal, waiting to be recognized, not obeyed. We move past the urgency, past the alerts, past the admonishments, and in the absence of warning, clarity emerges. The distance that once required correction disappears. The separation that once demanded guidance is undone. The prophets step backward into quiet. Their words dissolve, their purpose recedes, and yet, nothing is lost. What remains is the awareness they sought to awaken, a recognition that has never left, a presence that has never moved. Before the warnings, before the call, before the distance, there was only unity, only presence, only the source, silent yet speaking in every moment that never left its beginning. And in that silence, we begin to understand. You never needed to return. You were never apart. You have always been here. Chapter 7. The End of Law. As we continue backward, the commandments begin to dissolve. The rules that once defined right and wrong, good and evil, begin to fade like morning mist. The stone tablets, the written codes, the scrolls of instruction, they all return to silence. At first, this seems impossible. Without law, without guidance, how can anything hold together? How can people know what to do, how to live, how to be? And then, slowly, we begin to see the truth. Law is never the source of morality. It is a reflection of understanding that has been lost, a structure built to preserve what we already know deep within. Without commandments, without regulations, nothing falls apart. The world does not descend into chaos. People do not stumble blindly, because what is true does not need to be commanded. What is real does not require rules to exist. Right and wrong are not lessons to be taught, they are remembered, felt, recognized in the quiet awareness of being. The more the law dissolves, the clearer it becomes. Law arises only when separation exists. When humans forget their connection to the source, rules are necessary. But before separation, before distance, before the need to explain, the law is redundant. We see a world where morality is not imposed, but inherent, where justice does not require enforcement, where compassion, integrity, and honesty are not laws to follow, but natural expressions of life itself. And as the rules vanish, freedom emerges, not freedom to choose arbitrarily, but freedom to align effortlessly with what has always been true. No fear of punishment, no hope of reward, no external measure of right and wrong, only recognition, internal and immediate, of what belongs, of what is. In this reversal, law is not removed, it returns to its origin. It becomes unnecessary, because the source is already present in all that is. And in that presence, we understand, the end of law is not lawlessness, it is return. Return to simplicity, return to unity, return to what has always been. Here, without rules, we are finally free. Free to be, free to recognize, free to live as life itself intended, without separation, without instruction, without need. Chapter 8. Before the promise. As we move farther back, the covenants begin to unwind. The promises between God and humanity, the agreements, the contracts, the sacred assurances fade into silence. No terms, no conditions, no if and then. The bonds that once seemed essential dissolve as if they were never needed at all, because promises exist only when separation exists, only when distance, forgetfulness, or imperfection create a gap that must be bridged. And as we move backward, that distance disappears. The spaces that required guarantees, reassurances, or commitments are erased. There is no between anymore, no intermediary, no expectation, only presence, only unity. We begin to see the paradox. Covenants were never about creating connection. They were about reminding us that connection already exists. They were scaffolding, meant to point back to something eternal, unbroken, unconditioned. As the words of promise vanish, we are left with something far simpler, far more profound. Presence itself is the promise. Being itself is complete. There is no need to negotiate, no need to ask for assurance, no need to wait for fulfillment. What is true has always been true. What is whole has always been whole. Without covenants, the world does not collapse. Humanity does not drift into chaos. Instead, the silence that replaces the promises is rich, full, and alive. It contains all that is necessary. It contains everything. We sense it, a knowing that does not require articulation, a reality that does not require permission, a love, a unity, a source that has never wavered, never asked for terms, never imposed conditions. The promises recede. Their words return to the quiet from which they came, and in that quiet, we recognize the truth they pointed to all along. There was never separation, never distance, never lack. Before the promise, there was only presence. Before the covenant, there was only unity. And in that unity, we find what no agreement can create: completeness, eternity, the source itself unmoving, unending, already here. Chapter 9. The simplicity of being human. Now we arrive at humanity in its earliest form, not as a story of conflict, choice, or consequence, but as pure life itself. There are no nations, no borders, no hierarchies, no distinctions that divide or separate, no labels, no roles, no rules to follow, just living, simple, immediate, uncomplicated. And yet, even in this simplicity, there is awareness. Life does not need instruction to be lived. Humanity does not require ceremony or doctrine to exist. Every thought, every breath, every heartbeat flows naturally, in harmony with what surrounds it, in rhythm with what has always been present. In this layer of existence, we begin to notice something subtle. The first layers of separation have not yet emerged. Desire has not yet turned into ambition. Fear has not yet hardened into boundaries. Identity exists, but only as a gentle sense of self within a whole, not as division, not as opposition, not as I against you. And yet, even here, something is about to change. For this is not the source, this is not the origin, this is only the last layer before it. The final step before unity becomes visible as itself. Here, humanity is not yet aware of history, of morality, of promise, or law. There is no expectation, no story to follow, no next step to accomplish. There is only being, simple, whole, present. It is quiet, but it is alive, still, but moving, human, but yet untouched by complication. And in this simplicity, a truth begins to emerge. Even before knowledge, even before choice, life contains the seed of return. Every layer of complexity we will later add, every law, every promise, every belief is built upon this fundamental simplicity. It is here, in this unadorned humanity, that we sense what has always been underneath all layers of history and story, the natural flow toward unity, the pull back toward the source, and as we continue backward, leaving even this uncomplicated life behind, we realize the beginning is not here. This is only the last step before the true origin. Here, in simplicity, we are ready to step into the layer, before choice itself the point, where life was never divided, never separated, and never apart from the source. Chapter 10, Before the First Choice. Now we arrive at the garden, but not the story you remember, not temptation, not disobedience, not the fall. Those come later, in forward time. Before all of that, before knowledge creates division, there is only presence. There is no shame, no fear, no separation, no right and wrong, no names, no roles, no expectation, just being, just life, just unity, a seamless whole where awareness exists without division, where consciousness is not yet fractured into I and other. In this place, everything is complete, everything is immediate, every sensation, every thought, every breath belongs fully to the source. There is no barrier, no boundary, no distance. Everything that will later be defined as law, as promise, as morality, as story, does not yet exist. Choice has not yet appeared. Decision is not required. Knowledge has not yet cast its shadow. The mind has not yet begun to measure, compare, or judge. There is no first sin, because sin is born of separation. There is no conflict, because conflict arises only when unity is forgotten. And even here, in this primordial wholeness, there is a quiet knowing, a recognition of source, not as a figure, not as an idea, not as a story, but as the fundamental presence from which all life flows. The garden itself is not the beginning. It is the last threshold before the beginning. The final layer before the source is fully revealed. Here, in this unity, we sense the truth that will echo backward through all layers of human existence. Separation was never real. Division was never inevitable. The source was never lost. And in that understanding, we see the ultimate pattern of existence. Everything that comes after the choices, the stories, the struggles, the teachings are journeys away from and back toward this unbroken, indivisible presence. Before the first choice, there is only being, only unity, only presence, and even this is not the source, it is the layer just beneath complexity, the point at which all beginnings converge, waiting for recognition, waiting to return, waiting to reveal that the source has never been apart. Conclusion, back to God. Now, everything disappears, the garden fades, humanity fades, creation itself dissolves, time unwinds, space recedes, stories collapse, names vanish, even the memory of existence drifts into silence, and what remains? Not nothing, not emptiness, not absence, the source, God, not as an idea, not as a character in a story, not as a distant observer, but as the origin of all things, the presence that underlies life, thought, law, promise, and history, the unity that all layers point toward, even when we cannot see it. By moving backward, by stripping away empire, law, religion, instruction, story, and identity, we have not erased meaning, we have uncovered it, we have returned to the essence beneath all complexity. Everything that exists is layered, every experience, every creation, every story, every belief is built upon a foundation that never shifts, never breaks, never departs, and every layer leads back through struggle and triumph, through illusion and truth, through separation and reunion, back to simplicity, back to unity, back to God. No matter how far life seems to move outward, no matter how much we build, create, forget, or fall, we never leave the source. We only move away to recognize the distance, to experience it, and ultimately to return. This journey is not linear. It is not chronological. It is not about what happens next, but about what has always been. The story, in reverse, reveals that the origin is not ahead or behind, not past or future. It is here. It is always here. And now, at the end, we see the beginning. The end was never final. Separation was never real. And all the paths, all the layers, all the stories, lead back, back to life, back to being, back to the source, back to God.